So this is where he landed, then, right next to the well.
This is a pretty good replica of the well at that time. When I was first here, it was kind of a wishing well approach, and they got a better, not a photograph, but a better drawing of what this really looked like. And it turned out to be something like that.
Was it paved like this at the time? It was all dirt.
Yeah.
With the red.
Oh, wait, probably for you.
Red?
Smells musty.
It must be someone's on a tour.
We restored, but nevertheless, it was done by journal and pretty close identification. But you remember when he was 19, he was making barrels. This is the kind of barrels that he would make for guns with single shot. Now, he didn't make these per se, but they're like it. Look, ladies, he even made you a nice little musket in those days, see, for home use. The only thing is you had to be very careful. You only had one shot, and if there were 3 Indians standing in the doorway, what would you do?
Shoot for the pile behind him so it ricochets.
Just tell him to line up. Well, let me show you what he did here to make a barrel. He'd get his forge going, get it all nice and hot and get the bellows blowing. Then he'd take a 12-pound piece of black soft iron, get it heated in there about 8 or 10 inches, come over to his graduated anvil and start pounding and bending and heating and pounding and bending. Finally, when he'd get it to the final one, he'd take this rod called a mandrel, and that would be the size of the ball he was going to shoot out of that. He'd put it in here like this, and then with this tool, when it was white hot, he could forge that into one solid measure. Well, here it is right here, like it. And the only problem in those days is that when you shot a ball, you know what would happen? The ball would drift when you shot it out. Well, if you had a buffalo or a deer in your sights, you may not hit it. And then you couldn't bring food home to the family, and that was pretty serious. Huh? But here, come on over here. Look what they did to solve that. Look in there and tell me what you see. Look in the barrel on the sides. Look clear through it. It twists. Little curlicues in there called rifling. And when they invented rifling, oh, that just, you know why? What happens when a quarterback throws that football and it spirals through the air? Yeah, it hits the target, doesn't it? That's what happens when you shoot a bullet and put a spin on a bullet. It'll hit where you're pointing. And so there was a great invention. Well, Jonathan didn't invent the spiraling, but look what he did. He invented a way to put it into his barrels with this little jig. He's going to make this configuration go inside that barrel, put a rod in there, and then over here he had a nice carbon scratching tip. Then what he would come over and do, he'd bring it here, he'd twist and scratch, twist and scratch. Well, if you did that 200 times, you could have a furrow. And then if you did it, of course you had 7 of them, you'd have to do it 1,400 times. Well, let's see what you got when it was all done. First of all, in the shop here, he would make the rifle stock right here. See the stock? The wooden part there. Then he made his barrel. Then he would buy these firing mechanisms called locks on here, okay? Then when he put them all together, what did he have?
Lock and flint.
What?
Lock and flint.
Well, almost a gun, that's correct, but I want something else. It's a famous saying. You really know it, and I'll show you why. Ready? He got the lock, the stock, and barrel, meaning the whole gun. You were right, see? The whole gun, but they call it the lock, stock, and barrel. Well, he could do that.
We're now inside the post office.
I don't want to get in everybody's movie.
You want to hear about the post
I
office?
can, I'll
Yeah,
stand,
you wanna
stand-
step
I'll
over
stand in
here?
line and I can do that.
Step over here and I will tell you all about our post office. Commerce and then Nauvoo, but the Nauvoo area is the one that we're mostly particular in going to explain to you today. And Sidney Rigdon was a postmaster. He actually started in his home, and it was in his kitchen, just east of us, up here where the mansion house is at, and that's where the post office was at. And then
I'll go ahead. I'm interrupting everybody.
no, you're not. Go ahead.
Which way you headed? Back home or away? On the east coast?
They are, what's really
Come on
neat
in,
is
you can sit down if
when
you
take
like.
my computer. There's just not much you can't do.
You can just show them up on your TV screen.
Oh, well, right, I can run a slideshow on this camera, or on a TV, or on a computer. But when you have the computer, if it's overexposed, underexposed, or you want to cut, clip, move, paste, you can do it, the whole thing.
And he was a very aggressive man as far as dealing with the public as well as dealing with these competitors. He had 13 other shoe shops here in Nauvoo that he had to compete with, and there was something like 200 shoemakers and cobblers in Nauvoo back in the 1840s when he had this building, the original one built. This is not the original. This has been a duplication by photograph from the original. And the original set on a piece of ground he bought when he came here, and it's a 16-foot frontage onto Main Street, which is a very good place to place your business.
I have allergies, so
Oh, that's fine.
it doesn't smell very good in there for me.
Well, I was using little blue stuff, and it's got a little holder to it.
Yeah.
You can't caught that one, huh? Okay, some of the things you'll have to kind of peek around the corner what we talk about as we go. I wonder if he got, excuse me.
Dad, now we're waiting for you.
I will tell you about this place. If this house could talk, it would say that it had 2 Kimball owners. The first one was Heber C. Kimball, and he built the home in 1845. And then Dr. Leroy Kimball remodeled it in 1854. So this is not the original home. It's the original walls and everything, but the rooms have been changed in this home and it is original. And this is a picture of Dr. Leroy Kimball, and this is one of Heber C. Kimball. And this is Heber C. Kimball's wife, Valade, right there. The furnishings in this home were not the Kimballs. They're furnishings that Dr. Leroy Kimball acquired of the period, except that this clock on the mantle was Heber C. Kimball's, and the andirons here at the fireplace were Heber C. Kimball's, and that's the only thing that was his. And the piano is from England in the 1800s, and it doesn't have 2 octaves on it. And it's the same kind of piano that Beethoven had, that he played on. Yes, and
This is Queen Victoria's music box.
Yeah. And some of the toys that the children might have had. These are little short windows too, aren't they? This,
These toys are authentic, aren't they?
just from the period, from the 1800s.
That's what I mean,
yes.
authentic from that
Yes.
period.
And you'll notice there in the doorway the width of the wall, because this was the first original one, and the other part is an added addition. That
So this is the way it was
Yes.
originally when it was purchased by Dr.
yes,
Kimball.
yes.
Oh, did he have a lot of work?
Yeah.
He did, didn't he?
And when they went west, he did not sell his home, but he left it to the trustees of the church here in Nauvoo. And they did get $100 for it, and then some bartering besides.
So when was this actually built then? This was the original home?
Yes, that's part of the original home. Yeah, it's all part of the original home.
But it had been refurbished sometime.
The home,
Yeah.
Dr. Leroy Kimball.
No, I mean prior to that.
Oh, it had been lived in, yes, yes. It was abandoned when Dr. Leroy Kimball, I mean, there was nobody in here when he purchased it, but yeah, it had been lived in.
You know, it blows my mind that they would let things like that, you know, that it would be abandoned and sit here for years.
Yeah,
They
To
just kind of,
deteriorate.
that just blows my mind, and yet you see evidence,
Yeah,
other homes
that's
were
right.
too.
That's right.
That is,
Yeah.
thank heavens that,
Here in Nauvoo. They know of 20, but they don't know where all the rest
where
of
the
them
others
are.
are.
So that's an original.
This is
That
an
was made
original.
in England, right?
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
is this one that Dr. Kimball had purchased, or was this just
Now,
something
I don't
that
know.
is here?
Yeah. I,
Probably just something much of themselves
That's right.
out for this.
well, and he loved his ancestors, and you know, it was
Yeah,
a
but
tribute
still,
to his.
it's neat that he would,
Yeah.
you know,
to
just
do
be that large.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he evidently had the funds to do it with.
Yeah, but a lot of people go on yachts and
Yeah.
whatever.
Well,
you
that's
know.
right.
So,
That's right.
but look what he started. You know,
Yeah.
when he started this, it just kind of
Yeah,
mushroomed.
that's right. Until Nauvoo.
This property belonged to Porter Rockwell.
When they started doing this in the field, they would also dig trenches that were lower than the first brick layer. And that's so that they could shove wood in and burn. Okay? So when they got going and got that all done, how would they ever know when a brick was done? How do you know what a cookie's done? You get shit. Yeah, but you open
They would use the mud for mortar, so it really
Or
would
with the, imagine where they're coming in the.
I just wondered if the meat destroyed the brick.
No. There was a brickyard right in this exact spot back in those days, but we do know there were 7 brickyards here in Nauvoo. 2 of them were down on the flats here. The other 5 was up on the bluff. And for a period of about 4.5 years, they made over 4,000 or 4 million brick a year here in the Nauvoo area. So it was a big industry. Now, when the folks came to Nauvoo, this was a swamp area. They drained it and then started building their homes. The folks that came here was from England. They were from Europe, and when they came to Nauvoo, they wanted Nauvoo to be their permanent home, and so they wanted their homes that they built to be more permanent, and that's why they thought of brick. A lot of those folks had lived in areas where they had brick homes. Many of them were skilled in as brick masons. They knew how to make brick, and so one of the first things that they did as they got here was to see if they had the materials required to make brick. The first material that's necessary for brick is this stuff right here. What is it?
Rain.
Or sand.
Sand, yeah. Where would you get sand here in Nauvoo?
River.
River. Mississippi River hauls in this hundreds and hundreds of tons of sand. If you go down and get a load of sand, guess what? A few minutes later, it's going to be, the hole you dug is going to be full again, right? So plenty of sand. The next ingredient necessary is this stuff. Clay. Now, up northeast of town, there's a farmer up there that had a side hill on his farm that was just loaded with clay like this. And he was glad to get rid of this because farmers hate clay. It's not good for farming. I think he thought that maybe if he got rid of all that clay, that underneath it would be some good soil that maybe would grow some good corn or soybean. But apparently that didn't happen because we're still getting clay up there today to make our little souvenir bricks. Instead of being a side hill, it's kind of a quarry now because it has been digging a hole and getting the clay out of it. Okay, the other ingredient, of course, is water. We have plenty of water here. It rains a lot, plus we have the Mississippi River. And they knew from experience to make a good brick, you would use 4 parts of clay, 1 part of sand, and then just the right amount of water to get a icky, gooey kind of substance that sticks together. Okay? They would mix it in a mud pond, like you see this pond out here. Except the mud pond that they would use would be literally a pond. It wouldn't have cement in it, wouldn't have bricks, but it would just be a mud hole. And they would mix that mud in that pond. Probably instead of having steel wheels, they would have been wooden. And each of those folks would have a paddle on it, and they would hook an oxen or a horse and turn that. Then the kids that didn't get good grades, I always have to put this in, they'd have to get in there and pull their pant legs up and do a little tromping around too to get that all mixed in together. So it'd be you know, a good mixture of the sand and the clay and the water all mixed together. Thanks, folks. Do you mind if I backtrack just a little bit for these folks? This mold, and probably the mold that they would use there would be several of these. So they'd be making more than 1 brick at a time. But they would soak this in water so that the mud wouldn't stick. If they wanted the brick to have a little bit of a texture, you can see this is going to get a sand texture on it. To give the brick a little character, I call it, they would put sand on the one side here after they soaked it, and the sand would stick to it, and then that would give that side of the brick, the outside part of the brick, a little bit of character, a little bit of texture, so that it wouldn't be quite so plain. Okay, then the mudslinger would go down, he would get a handful of that mud. If he had a mold like this, just a single mold, then he would get a handful of that about the size of a football. And then he would bring that up here, and he would literally sling that or throw that into the mold. That's why they called him a slinger or a thrower. Then he would take a paddle, something like this, and he would pound that mud into the mold, making sure that it's all the way down in the corners, in the bottom, so that the brick's going to be nice and square corners. Got to make sure the bubbles and everything's out of it. After he's done that, then he would use this. What is this, ladies? You think so? But he would use this, and he would trim the excess mud off of the top so it'd be nice and flat on the top like it is on the bottom. The excess mud he would throw back in the mud pond. Then he would let that set, depending on the kind of day it was. If there's not a lot of moisture in the air, maybe 10 or 15, 20 minutes. So it starts to dry, set up a little bit. Then he could just lift that mold off, and what you would have there is a wet green adobe brick. Now if you lived in St. George, where I live, or if you lived in Arizona or New Mexico or some parts of California, and they used to do that, they built a lot of homes out of adobe brick, back in the old times at least, and maybe they still do. But here in Nauvoo, that won't work. Because of the humidity, that adobe brick would fall to pieces probably faster than you could stack them end to end. So of course they had to fire them, they had to cook them. But before they did that, they had to dry these brick, and it would take about 2 weeks to dry that adobe brick. If the weather was good, they could just take them outside and let them dry. If the weather wasn't good, then they would have to put them in a hacking shed, which is nothing more than a drying shed. As those are drying, they have to hack them, and all hacking is turning that brick as it dries, so it dries evenly on all sides. Otherwise, quite often they will crack. So they would have to hack those or turn them maybe 4 or 5 or 6 times a day for the 2-week period that they're drying. We have to do the same thing in here as we're drying our little souvenir adobe bricks today. We do it inside in there, but we do have to turn them before we fire them. That takes about 2 weeks to do that. Okay? Now, as you come in, you notice the kiln out here. That little kiln, that's kind of a miniature model. That only holds about 100 or 1 to 200 bricks. Now, back in the time when Nauvoo was really thriving, they were making over 4 million brick a year for that 4.5 year period that they was building up Nauvoo. There was over 350 brick homes here in the area. Right across the road, Lucy Mack Smith over here, home, took about 42,000 brick to build that. Brigham Young's home down the road, it took about 40,000 bricks to build that. The Calvin Coolidge home up the road took about 60,000. So you can see cooking 100 or 200 brick at a time just didn't cut it. So they had to come up with something a little faster. People was waiting in line for brick back in those periods of time. And so what they developed was a field kiln. And on a flat surface, similar to what we have under the tarp over there, and the surface is brick out there, what they would do is go out on a surface like that, right out pretty much in the open, and they would stack their bricks. Anywhere from 100,000 to 300,000 brick. They would stack them so that the heat can penetrate on all sides of them, and they would stack those 20 brick high, and then I guess depending on how many you're firing would determine how wide it's going to be and how long it's going to be. But after they got those all stacked up, the 100,000 or 300,000, whatever you're going to fire, then over the top of that they would build a temporary kiln that would look just like this one over out here, except it's going to be larger because you've got a lot more brick in there. You understand what I mean? But it's just temporary. They use it one time, and then to get the brick out, you have to tear that kiln all the way down. Now, instead of using mortar in the kiln like we use this one out here to hold it in place, they would use mud from the mud pond. Okay? After they got it all built and all the brick in and the kiln all built up, then they would put wood in, similar to the wood that we've got stacked out here, and they say that this wood is about 1/4 as much as you would need to fire kiln of brick. It took a lot of wood. Probably at one time in the Nauvoo area, they'd almost used every tree there was to fire their brick kiln. The wood here is not good for building homes. It rots, and it's hardwood. So the homes were built from wood from the pineries of Wisconsin. So they just burn mostly this timber that's here in their brick kilns and to keep them warm in their stoves in the wintertime.
This is a prairie grass demonstration. The tall grass prairie once covered a fifth of the continental United States. This landscape of grass and wildflowers was often taller than a man's head. Parley P. Pratt, writing of the prairie between Nauvoo and Carthage, said, "We rode 17 miles through a beautiful plain. Our route was a most delightful one." This prairie restoration was begun in 1992. While not yet mature, the planting should give you some idea of the majesty of the landscape greeting the early settlers of this area. And it says next is the annual spring burn in early of April 2002.